Hi everyone, my name's Dr. Ettensohn. Welcome to Heal NPD. This is part 3 of a 4-part series exploring the narcissistic personality style across different levels of severity. In part 1, we explored psychotic-level NPD, laying the foundation for understanding the core concepts used in this series. In part 2, we discussed borderline-level NPD, further elaborating on the developmental continuum of personality organization and associated object relations. If you haven't watched those videos yet, I recommend checking them out first. Links are in the description. In this episode, we'll explore the narcissistic personality style at the neurotic level of organization. At this level, we're no longer talking about personality disorders. In neurotic organization, there are sufficient ego strengths and capacities to defend against the significant distortions of thought, feeling, and perception that are typically associated with personality disorders. Here, we encounter mature object relations and a more organized sense of self. The shift to neurotic organization symbolizes the emergence of stable and coherent self and object images, the capacity for mature grief and remorse, and ultimately, the ability to love others in a more stable and balanced way. Due to the length and complexity of the material, this portion of the series has been divided into 3 separate videos. Each segment explores a distinct facet of narcissistic personality style at the neurotic level of organization. This first video serves as a conceptual bridge between immature modes of perceiving the self and others and the mature integrated object relations that are characteristic of neurotic organization. It begins with a review of key components of psychotic and borderline experience, building on material covered in previous episodes in order to trace the arc of development toward a more continuous and coherent experience of self, the capacity to recognize others as stable and autonomous subjects, and the growing ability to tolerate ambivalence, disappointment, and loss without fragmentation. The core features of this developmental leap are identified and clearly articulated, laying the conceptual groundwork for the material that follows. In the second video, we'll explore the emotional consequences of this shift. What does it mean to become a subject with a history, to experience mature guilt and loss, and to grieve what cannot be repaired? We'll also examine how this developmental shift occurs, what kinds of experiences, relationships, and psychological capacities make it possible to move from fragmentation toward integration. In the third and final video, we'll examine the defenses associated with neurotic level functioning. We'll look closely at how individuals at this level manage internal conflict, and we'll also explore how narcissism appears at this level, what makes it different from personality-disordered narcissism, and the therapeutic dynamics that tend to arise in treatment with these individuals. So let's get started. The progression from psychotic to healthy personality organization is a journey of self-definition. We're not born with anything resembling a clear sense of self. As infants, we have no concept of who or what we are. The world is a blur of sensations and impulses. It's only through time and experience that mental images of the self begin to emerge from the deluge of sensory information. In infancy, we begin to make rudimentary distinctions between experiences that feel continuous with our own bodies, such as the warmth of a caregiver's touch, the soft fluidity of milk while nursing, the containment of being swaddled or held, or the soothing tones of a caregiver's voice, and experiences that disrupt this sense of sameness, bringing us into stark contrast with the outside world. Theorist and analyst Thomas Ogden refers to these cohesive, uninterrupted experiences of sameness as contiguous experiences. These are sensations that sustain a feeling of safety and reassurance, facilitating what Donald Winnicott called going on being, a state of unbroken reverie in which thought, feeling, and perception are allowed to flow undisturbed. These contiguous experiences form the foundational building blocks of a non-traumatized self, providing a safety or refuge from disruptive and overwhelming sensory experiences of otherness, such as the cold, hard surfaces of the external world, sensations of hunger or pain. Such experiences of otherness fracture the infant's sense of sameness and belonging, laying the foundation for what will eventually emerge as images of the self and others. In moderation, such disruptions help form an essential developmental milestone, the idea of a bounded surface, a delineated place where the self resides. However, when these are too frequent or too intense, they overwhelm the infant's fragile self-structure, leading to developmental trauma. What is a self, after all, but a concept defined by the interplay of sameness and otherness, belonging and separation? We don't start life thinking of ourselves as selves. The concept of self is learned, and its development begins with simple caregiving dynamics. Are we held often enough? Are we fed when hungry? Is it warm enough? Does caregiving occur predictably and consistently, allowing us to discern patterns in the sensations that we experience? Or are we left crying for hours, overwhelmed by hunger, cold, and isolation? These early experiences, consistent, responsive care versus neglect and disorganization, shape the first layers of self-image, forming the foundation of our eventual adult identities. When early experience is overwhelmingly other, when caregiving is chronically insufficient, leaving the infant too often terrified, cold, or hungry without reassurance, the proto-self cannot consolidate into a stable kernel of selfhood, and the stage is set for the disorganized, fragmented perceptions and experiences that often characterize psychotic-level organization. If, however, early experience is, quote, good enough, allowing for a tolerable balance of sameness and otherness, the proto-self can consolidate, establishing a kernel of self that resists the fragmentation typical of psychotic experiences. This allows us to progress from psychotic to borderline organization. Although the self remains malleable, porous, and vulnerable to confusion with the outside world, reality testing, though still unstable, becomes more reliable. Borderline organization is marked by intense ambivalence about being a separate self. Self and object images overlap, particularly during heightened emotional states, resulting in confusion about interpersonal dynamics. Are you hurting me, or am I hurting you? Relationships with individuals organized at the borderline level often involve a game of hot potato concerning who is the bad object. Bad feelings are projected onto others, denied, or acted out via disorienting and sometimes frighteningly intense interpersonal conflicts. The self may also come under assault by harsh or critical introjects, which are internalized aspects of abusive or inflexible caregivers that can lead to depressive symptoms, unforgiving self-criticism, self-harm, or even suicide. Borderline organization is characterized by conflicts around identity, control, and autonomy. When someone gets too close, the individual may feel invaded or overwhelmed and push them away. Conversely, when someone takes a step back, the individual may feel abandoned or rejected, leading to clinging dependency, idealization, or otherwise blurred boundaries in an attempt to restore a sense of sameness. The borderline self is inherently unstable and highly context-dependent. This instability, known as identity diffusion, is a hallmark of borderline states. Due to the fragile self-structure in both psychotic and borderline organizations, both levels are dominated by paranoid anxiety, which is a fear of loss or annihilation of self. However, this anxiety manifests differently at each level. In psychotic organization, paranoid anxiety fuels reality-distorting defenses, producing persistent existential dread and a sense that the self could utterly dissolve or annihilate at any moment. In borderline organization, paranoid anxiety produces persistent egocentrism, a self-focus that impairs empathy and makes it difficult or impossible to see other people clearly. Now, this isn't the same thing as selfishness. It's a primitive anxiety about annihilation of self that fuels preoccupations with bodily and psychic integrity and produces highly reactive states of mind. Minor conflicts can feel like life-altering emergencies. A breakup can seem like the end of the world. Small inconveniences can activate parts of the self that already feel on the verge of collapse, provoking extreme anxiety or rage. At the borderline level, paranoid anxiety combines with blurred images of the self and others to create perceptual distortions. Significant others, family members, friends, and coworkers shift in and out of clear focus, at times appearing to embody extreme qualities that are actually projections. A friend can suddenly seem like an enemy. A loved child can abruptly feel devalued or even hated. This dynamic reflects a lack of object constancy. Images of the self and others do not remain stable or realistic, but instead mirror the internal polarizations of the borderline personality organization. These instabilities reflect deficits in ego functions. The self is too unstable and undifferentiated to hold images of the self and others constant in the face of shifting emotions and circumstances. Psychotic individuals distort reality to manage paranoid anxiety, while borderline individuals distort their self-image and images of other people to do the same thing. The world becomes a distorted mirror, reflecting the individual's internal instability, and these distortions affect both the present and memories of the past. When someone is devalued, they're not just perceived as worthless in the moment. Rather, the entire history of the relationship is rewritten to confirm that they were always worthless, and the same process applies to self-perceptions. At the borderline level, there is no historical subject. Objects move in and out of focus, with new histories invented to accommodate each shift. And this defense obliterates history to remove accountability, which is experienced as too threatening and thereby triggers paranoid anxiety. The borderline self is traumatized, and it's easily overrun with feelings of badness that evoke paranoid anxiety. Such anxieties can be neutralized by redrawing the lines of self and others so that the bad feelings are perceived to exist in someone else, or rewriting history so that the self is no longer guilty of having done anything wrong. Familiar borderline-level narratives include statements that blame shift or minimize consequences of their actions, like, "I only did it because you wouldn't listen to me," or "You made me feel so bad, so I got you back," etc. In addition, splitting can produce a devalued self-state that evokes reassuring or sympathetic responses. "You're right. I'm terrible and I don't deserve to live." Or, "I'm such a horrible person that I don't deserve love and I'm not surprised that you hate me." In both cases, there's an inability to construct a balanced, moderate, and realistic version of events where neither the self nor the other becomes a bad object. This dynamic makes apologies feel hollow or manipulative. If someone hurts you and then apologizes by insisting they're such a terrible person that they don't deserve to live, it forces you to take care of them, shifting attention away from the harm that they caused. It's important to underscore that these dynamics are not usually intentionally manipulative. They reflect the borderline individual's unstable self-structure, paranoid anxiety, and tendency to blur boundaries in response to strong emotions. That being said, without stable images of the self and others, without history, there can be no real accountability. Ogden's term for this mode of perceiving and relating is self as object. It's where both the self and others are experienced as interchangeable objects rather than stable, enduring subjects with histories that can't be rewritten to manage anxiety. He writes, "In a realm of objects, as opposed to subjects, safety is attained through qualitative shifts and magical all-or-nothing transformations. The past is constantly changing, and each new event radically changes all previous ones. The present is immediately projected onto all previous experience, thus annihilating the past. The past becomes merely a fluid extension of the present. Only when another person can no longer be magically recreated does it become possible to miss someone who is away or to mourn someone who has died or who has left permanently. When the other can be experienced as having an existence separate from one's own, it becomes possible to be with that person and be away from that person in an entirely different way from that which had been possible previously. End quote. This inability to hold the past constant, and the tendency to treat both self and others as interchangeable objects, prevents authentic experiences like grief and mourning. The ability to experience mature love, loss, and sorrow depends on perceiving others as distinct, enduring subjects who cannot be magically replaced through fantasy and projection. Mature love requires seeing oneself and others as stable, autonomous beings with an immutable history. This is the developmental shift that allows the transition from borderline to neurotic organization, bringing with it the capacity to experience life as a subject, one who is capable of helping or harming others in ways that cannot be denied, erased, or undone. So far, we've explored the movement from borderline to neurotic level organization, a developmental shift that opens the door to a more stable and enduring experience of self and others. This transition brings new capacities, the ability to sustain coherent self and object images, to tolerate contradictions, and to begin recognizing the emotional and relational consequences of our actions. But these gains also come with a cost. In the next video, we'll begin to examine what becomes possible and what becomes painful when the self stabilizes. We'll look at how the loss of defensive fragmentation gives way to a deeper kind of grief, and how the capacity for continuity also introduces the burdens of guilt, accountability, and loss. I hope you'll continue with part 2. Until next time, take good care.